Hey everybody. So this week we're going to do another seam tutorial. You guys are super psyched when we do little tutorials that'll help you make stuff, which is what we're here for. So this week we're doing what's called a French seam. A French seam is similar to a butt joint where we're taking two separate pieces of leather and joining them right in the middle without overlapping them. The difference is that it's sewn down the middle, and then we're going to do a lot of skiving, and then we lay these two parts flat and sew them again, so it's kind of triple stitched. It's a lot more rigid than a butt joint, so we're going to get into it. All right, so like the double seam video, I'm just going to make a little sample of this because a lot of the times you're going to be doing a French seam on a small piece, like a gusset, when you don't have a piece long enough, a piece of leather long enough to join a whole gusset together. You can do a French seam, or you can do a butt joint, or you can do an overlap joint and rivet it together. You got plenty of options. This is just a nice alternative option that it's nice to know about. So I'm going to get our two pieces here cut, and then we have to do some skiving, and it's going to be a little bit of a deeper skive. So if you do rolled edges on pockets, it's going to be a skive that's deep like that. So we need a wide skive for this, so I'm going to set my calipers over a 1/2 inch. It's a little bit arbitrary, but I'm just going to do it over a 1/2 inch. And make my skiving line here, and make a skiving line here. Now I'm using the largest sized Japanese straight knife that Weaver sells, and this is the one that I sanded down the heel so that it lays a little bit more flat. There are, of course, skiving knives where you use it the opposite direction. This one you can, but I have this one sharpened to use it with the edge facing up. So I sanded down the heel so that it'll lay a bit more flat for doing deeper skives like this, and it works well. I'm using the large one because I find it easier to do the deeper skives with the large blade as opposed to a small, like this is the smaller one. This is really good for tight corners and stuff. So it's always good to have a couple different sizes of these skiving blades around. They're affordable, they work well, they last forever, they stay sharp, and but you really do have, there are different uses for each size of blade. So, oh geez Louise, don't throw it. Big skiving blade, let's get to skiving. But when you're doing a skive this deep, I usually hang my piece off. This is a granite block, and I hang my piece off the block so that I can kind of get this blade as flat as possible. And you just go really slow, and you can, if you want, you don't have to do it all in one go. You can just kind of slowly shave off a little layer. You could also use a French edger for this as well. And if we had a little bit of tear out, that's fine because it's on the inside of the bag, and then we would theoretically line it over that, so you would never see this. And then I'm actually going to go back and take even a little bit more off to just try to get this transition as gradual as possible, because that's going to make a really nice French seam. Because we're essentially making a rolled pocket top, right? So we're going to sew this in the middle, but then we're going to roll this over and glue it down. So we want this to be able to be as flat as possible. Now we'll do the other one. And if you are not super familiar with skiving yet, a good tip for this to practice this skill and all skiving skills, we do have a video on how to skive that has always been one of our most viewed videos because it kind of goes really super into depth. But you can see I'm using, this is the Sao Paulo leather we've been using for Weaver. We love it. And it's got some waxes and stuff in it, so it's a lot easier to skive. So if you're new to skiving, pick a hide like this. Doesn't have to particularly be Sao Paulo, but pick a waxed hide. It'll be a lot easier to get your knife through and learn these skills than a drier type of hide, like just a regular natural veg. This is very much possible to do on natural veg, but if you're new to all this and you're trying to learn how to skive and learn these techniques, it's going to be easier to learn on a softer, more waxy hide. So now you can see we have a very gradual taper there, and we're ready to make our first stitch line. Okay, so I've adjusted my calipers again. This time, I've cut the distance in half so that when we fold this over, it will land right at the start of this skive line here and hopefully kind of hide all the skive marks. And all we're going to do is we're going to make a stitch line on both sides. And now we're ready to punch. We're actually not going to glue this first stitch line together. We're going to pre-punch both of these pieces and then sew them together because there really isn't a place to put any glue. All of this is going to be visible either from the outside or the inside. To make sure our holes line up, I'm going to hang one prong off the top, and that's going to set my spacing. And then I'm just going to punch right down one side. And then I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to start at the top again on this side. And now we know, because we used the prong spacing as our spacing from the top, we know these are going to line up well.
Now, if you're stitching this onto something else, you mark that, and that's where you stitch?
What?
That's where you start punching? Like, say you have like the 1/4 inch.
Oh yeah, so if you were going to sew this, like if you're, like with this, right? If you wanted to, you knew you were going to sew it into here, you would take your caliper. I don't have our dividers for our other stitch line. Yeah, so what you would do is you would mark that stitch line first, like this, so you knew you were going to sew there. And then you would start at this intersection so that you're not punching through stitches when you install it as a gusset. Yeah. So we punched our pieces like this. All we're going to do is put one on top of the other with the inside out, and then we're going to sew it up.
No glue?
Nope, no glue. Like I said, there's no place to put glue because it's going to be folded in like this and out, so there's nowhere in here that you could put glue that's not going to be visible. We are going to, once we fold this over, we're going to glue this. Unless someone has a way that you can glue these. If you do, leave it in the comments. I don't do this seam a whole lot, so if you have a better way to do it with the gluing aspect, by all means, let us know. So up to this point, all we've done is just kind of stitch two pieces of leather together. This is kind of where the whole process of the seam begins. So if we open this up, we can see this is what we want to kind of look like, but we're going to focus on the back, because what we're going to do now is we're going to split this seam down the middle, and this is why we couldn't glue in here. And we're going to press it down and do a little bit of hammering. Now, depending on your leather, and I can't stress this enough, I didn't mean to point at you guys, sorry. Depending on your leather, you might have to wet mold this. If you're using an oil tanned hide or a hide like a bridle that has a lot of wax and you've skived it really thin, you probably won't have to. But this isn't waxy enough that I want to risk folding this over, because what can happen is, and it's just a natural thing with some leathers, if you don't wet mold it, you could split the leather from trying to fold it completely in half and hammering it. So you can see I didn't fully wet mold it. I just took my wool dauber and I put a little bit of water on the inside grain here. For this hide, that should be enough. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wet mold it and let it kind of dry in place before we come back and glue it. Because my goal for this seam, which is the reason I'm not really worried about this tear out, is I want to be able to show you guys what it looks like to sew this seam and then line it so that you have a butt joint on this side, or the joint butts up together on this side, but on this side you're going to have a full flat panel. So we're just going to hammer this lightly. And that's enough. We have our bend. So now we're going to let it dry, probably only like 10-15 minutes, and we'll come back in and we'll put glue. You don't want to put glue while this is still wet. You want to let the leather dry out first. So now that we're all dried, we're going to lift these sides up here, and we're going to put a little glue in there. And we did finally get our glue pots in, so now we're going barge full time. That the Weldwood just got, I don't know, I think they changed their formula. got less sticky. But it's the same thing, just brush on your glue. And we're going to line this, so it doesn't really matter. If you're going to leave it like this and not line it, make sure you scribe a line so that you know where to glue up to and don't glue over it, because you don't want glue peeking out past your folds. But if you're doing what we're doing and lining the whole thing after, go wild with it. Doesn't really matter where you put glue.
So the water from the dauber, does it stain the leather on the other side?
It depends on the leather. So this leather, no. But if you're using like veg tan, that's why I use the dauber, because you don't want to wet it all the way through, because then it'll stain a natural veg tan or an unprocessed leather. But usually, like any processed leather isn't, the water usually isn't going to stain it if you just put a light coat on the back. But obviously test any leather before you are dampening pieces, finished pieces. So now that our glue's dry to the touch, all we're going to do is fold this down, and I'm going to bring you over here to our granite block. We want to hammer this down so it's nice and flat.
Good as well.
Oh, you're right. And with all of our skiving and wet molding, you can see that that is basically one thickness throughout now. So the next step is we're going to sew 2 lines, and you don't have to do this. So what you could do is you could just line this or make your bag, right? But on a traditional French seam, now we're going to go down and we're going to stitch 2 separate lines along the edges, the outside edges of our center seam. All we have to do is mark our stitch lines, and you can do this if you want to just do this with like a ruler and a scratch awl. You can do that too, just kind of put it where you want. And then I'm just using the grid on my mat to make a little line to stitch. Or you can use your dividers and kind of just jam it down in that seam. So it pretty much does the same thing.
Hey, nice mat.
Oh, thanks. We're really enjoying our new mat. Or our new mats. We got 3. We only had 1 cutting mat in our entire workshop before for like 7 years.
For no reason. There's no reason for that.
Reason, no. All right, so we gotta get this stitched up, and then we'll get to lining everything and finishing up. All of our stitching now is done, and you can see basically what we did was we folded these down and then we ran a double stitched seam to hold them. Now the one big thing is we want to make sure we get a good hammer in and flatten this as much as we can. Okay, so now you have options here, like always, right? You can leave this seam like this. Now I didn't make sure to be very neat because I knew I was going to line this, but if you look at this one, I'm just leaving this like that, and you're good to go. If you want to take it to the next step, you can line this, and the way that you do that, it's pretty simple, but I'll show you how I do it. So I'm just going to cut a little chunk of this. This is like 2.5 ounce Herman Oak that we always use. But before we put our glue down, I'm going to take some of this sticky backed, very thin nylon fabric, and what I'm going to do is, well, first I'm going to use my non-existent fingernails to, there we go. I'm going to put this tape over this seam, and I'm going to do that for a couple reasons. The first is it'll stiffen it up a little bit. It shouldn't be floppy at all, but it'll just add a little bit more stiffness. The other thing is it's going to hide, once we glue this down, depending on the leather that you're using, your stitches can kind of patina and wear in over time. This will just kind of add a layer of rigidity and protection against that. I'm not saying it won't happen, but it'll just be a little more of a gentle wear and cycle, basically. And now we're ready to glue all this stuff up, and then we're almost done. And once our glue is dry to the touch, we're just gonna glue this down here and get our big roller. I can't tell you how much I've been using this thing. These are awesome. And I didn't even know they existed until like 2 weeks ago, so highly recommended. And so I'll just give this a trim, and we'll come back on top and talk about the seam and how you would apply it in making bags. And here we go. So you can see we have a nice, smooth, flat mating surface. No bumps or anything like that. And then the back, it just basically looks like a regular piece of leather with all the work that we did keeping everything skiving and putting our nylon fabric over top. And now what would you use this for? Well, obviously, in the example I have, you know, this is going to be a little crossbody bag. So you would use it when you didn't have enough leather, or if you had a design where you didn't want to bring the gusset all the way around a bag, right? The other thing is, I know you're probably saying, well, that works for this side, but then why would you fully line this side? And in this method of making a gusset, you wouldn't fully line the inside with a single piece. You'd actually do it in 3 pieces. So the idea is that this seam is directly centered on the bottom of the bag, like this. If you're going to line it, which I did not line this one, but I can show you, your liner would go from about 2/3 of the way down on the side, cover the whole bottom, and then come up. And then you would do a liner piece on the sides that's overlapping like a shingle, so that you do your liner in 3 pieces. And you do that so that when you look directly in the bag, you don't see a seam on the bottom. Your seams are going to be on the side. So essentially, it's just a way, if you don't have like a large piece of leather, to do a full gusset in one go, or if the bag's too big and it'd be too much to handle, you do this in 2 pieces and then the liner in 3, and you can make one long piece out of 5 pieces. So you can do it out of, like, say you only have a shoulder, but you want to make a messenger bag. You could easily get, you know, 2 12-inch strips and 3 8-inch strips. 8 and 8, 16, 24, yep. 3 8-inch strips out of, you know, a smaller chunk of leather. So that's going to be about it for this one. It's a really fun seam to do. I don't do them much, but you do them a lot in fabric, like sewing fabric on a sewing machine. But they're also really useful and really beautiful in leather. It makes things look very, very, very professional. So give it a go, and thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.